All right, joining us now to make more sense of the issue is lawyer, community organizer, and executive director of Yaga Africa, Samson Itodo. Very warm welcome to you, sir.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, it's not a full election cycle, but as minimal as it is, we're having series of allegations and counter-allegations and the rest. What are the reports Yaga Africa is getting from the field about the management and the integrity of the by-election today?
I think first things first, it is great to see that this election has finally come. It's not been concluded, but we know that it will be concluded. So we will say it has come and it has gone. Because this by-election ought to have been conducted last year. It wasn't conducted, it came to February, and one of the reasons why this election took this long was because funding was not released to INEC to conduct the election. And that itself is problematic because one way of capturing INEC and making it impossible to discharge its functions is when you deprive the Electoral Commission of the funding that it requires. So we're having this election today because INEC didn't have access to resources to conduct the election. But when you look at this election today, it tells us three things. The first thing is that our political class still don't want to abide by the basic rules and the tenets of democracy and credible elections. If you look at places like Kano, where there was this huge mobilization, of thugs, that itself is totally unacceptable. So it is clear. And I don't know what the 2027 elections...
Does it not mean that, the electorate, the voters, are they learning the tenets of democracy in the true sense?
No,
why thuggery?
No, exactly. So there are several issues. People take to thuggery for what you call socioeconomic inequalities. When they don't have access to opportunities, they don't have access to jobs, and the state isn't providing that, there is a theory that's what drives thuggery. The other point is the fact that when people have a sense of injustice and people feel that politicians do nothing but steal public funds and they don't deliver, they want to become instruments used by those same politicians to subvert the process.
A piece of the cake.
Right? Exactly. So that's one of the issues driving this. But I dare say that if you also look at, in other places, you listened to the REC previously, there was an attempt to hijack the process. If you look at Ogun State, you also see. So I think that what happened today is just an indication of what will happen in 2027.
I was going to ask you that. Will it serve as a great precursor to the 2027 elections about, the earlier two adjectives I used, integrity and management?
Absolutely. For a couple of reasons. One, I think the security agencies were quite responsive. In places like Kano, where they reprimanded, those thugs. We've also seen arrests in places like Kano, in Kaduna. We've also seen how 2 INEC officials and a political party agent were also arrested. So they were very responsive. But this is a by-election. In the 2027 elections, you'll be conducting elections across the entire country. So they will be overstretched. But I really want to give them the benefit of doubt and commend the security agencies for how they were responsive in today's by-election. But the third part is this level of turnout and why voters didn't show up. It could be as a result of different factors. First, it could be fatigue. Secondly, people just don't feel that participating in this election will make any difference in their lives. But when people say their votes don't count, the response is not to stay away, because when you stay away, majority of you will be governed by the minority of you. And that itself is an anomaly within a democracy. You have to show up and make it difficult for bad leaders to emerge in elections. But staying out is not what's going to fix this.
Are the political parties and even non-governmental organizations like yours doing, accelerating such campaigning to imbibe it in the consciousness of the people?
Yes, we're doing our bit. As civil society, the media is also doing its bit. But I think that democracy is a journey. Democracy requires persuasion, it requires competition of ideas, it requires dialogue and debates. We will continue to do that as civil society. We will continue to watch over our elections, and where there are gaps, we will identify those gaps and make it public. We will, as civil society, not lower the standards of holding our elected leaders to account, including our institutions. We will continue to hold INEC to higher standards. That's the only way democracy actually thrives. And so I think to a large extent, despite the challenges that civil society organizations face, they're performing their role. It's the same way media is also performing its role. But citizens, at the end of the day, are the kingmakers in a democracy. And if they don't activate their voice, if you have these elections across the states and you're recording this low turnout, it's also another way of sending a strong message to the political class that you might win an election, but that does not confer legitimacy.
And 26 years of the democratic journey, Samson, tell us, beavers, electronic voting, it looks like a mirage. And in other climes, African countries, there's that spontaneity in releasing results and, from the wards to the local government headquarters and the rest. Why is it such, a difficult thing to do here in Nigeria?
I think it's not a difficult thing to do. I think what makes it difficult is the attitude of your political class. They are the ones who are interfering with the electoral process. The beavers and the IREV were introduced to sanitize the process. In fact, aside the fact that the beavers was introduced to enhance efficiency with respect to voter accreditation, it was also introduced to limit proxy voting, multiple voting. Why? Because historically, politicians have circumvented elections by mobilizing voters to vote more than once or twice. And so I think that what is critical is that these technologies are here, they are here to stay. But there are three things that must be on the table. The first is that the Supreme Court has said that IREV is not part of the collation process. What the National Assembly need to do, I don't agree with the Supreme Court, right? But what the National Assembly needs to do, and what it's doing now, especially the House of Reps and the Senate, is to make electronic transmission mandatory. So have manual and electronic transmission hand in hand and make them mandatory by law. The second point is that the status of INEC's guidelines, regulations and guidelines is uncertain. On one hand, the court says that the guidelines and regulations are part of the legal framework and you have to comply substantially with provisions of the regulations. On the other hand, it says that the regulations are not part of the legal framework, that you cannot introduce electronic transmission via regulations because it is not included in the Act. And the third and perhaps the last point is that we need a greater level of transparency, and that INEC needs to subject the back end of the beavers, the back end of the IREF to independent audit and scrutiny. That way you give voters, you give stakeholders the assurance that there is no underhand, there is no manipulation of the back end of INEC's beavers and IREF servers, because you can't conduct elections without transparency. If you want people to trust the process and trust the outcome, you've got to be open. And that is why citizens are saying they need a new INEC. And the next INEC needs to be one that performs all of this. That's the only way we will strengthen our democracy. That's the only way we're going to get more people out to cast their vote in elections. That's the only way we're going to produce leaders that will be accountable to the Nigerian people.
Yes, indeed. But you can't take away, can you take away money politics as being, played in Nigeria? Money, in any political climb, is a key factor. Look at what was spent during the American presidential elections, humongous. But here, money is used as inducement. How good is that for our democratic culture?
Even though I listened to your initial news where one of the parties alleged that the resource, the monies that were
meant for logistics and the rest, yeah.
Now think about it. This is just election day, and that's about 28.5 million.
Yeah.
At a time when we've got Nigerians who cannot boast of one meal in a day, you have one individual or perhaps a political institution with that huge amount of money. Well, it's not established whether it's going to buy votes or logistics, but it also tells you how expensive it is. So for instance, as a candidate or as a political party, if you have 200 polling units in a particular constituency, you need to deploy party agents to those constituencies, right? To those polling units. You need to pay, the party agents. All of these are logistically intensive. But you can't have one individual, with that huge amount of money on election day, and it won't raise questions. And so these are the fundamental questions that we need to ask. Why is it that you have over 28-point-something million naira
on election day
to distribute to your party agents? There are other ways, of distributing. You have transfers that can be made, but I think
and those should have been done days before
we leave
the
it to the security agencies, to thoroughly investigate this. But if it is established that this is for vote buying, because it's a criminal offense, and you need to establish two factors. In law, we say the actus reus and the mens rea, both the act and the intention and the standard of proof. All of that will come to bear. But it's exciting to see that the security agencies arrested individuals with money, not just in Kaduna State, but also in, is it Ogun or your state?
Yeah.
It shows that we're making progress.
Okay, but the progress does not seem to be registered on having an election tribunal, to check, cases like this, fraudulent issues surrounding the elections. What are your thoughts here? Would it help to strengthen, Nigeria's democratic culture?
So some people believe that the reasons why we've not been able to prosecute electoral offenses is because INEC has a responsibility, for prosecution by virtue of the Electoral Act. But a big question is, if there is bribery, in the penal code, in the criminal code, bribery is a criminal offense. If you disrupt peace, right? It's also, a lot of the offenses that we categorize as electoral offenses are already offenses established in our criminal jurisprudence, right? So why do we have to saddle INEC with the responsibility of continuous prosecution of electoral offenders at a time where INEC says it is suffocated due to these responsibilities that it has? So there's a great need to establish an Electoral Offenses Commission. I totally support that. But then there are several safeguards that need to be in place. That the operational function of that commission should not be subject to the control of the Attorney General of the Federation. In relation to electoral offenses, the constitutional power that the Attorneys General of the Federation and the Attorney General of the Federation have to enter nolle prosecute, right, to discontinue criminal cases, also needs to be removed with respect to what? Electoral offenses. So it's not just establishing an Electoral Offenses Commission. There are other consequential actions that need to be taken to protect, the prosecution of electoral offenders. But if you don't prosecute electoral offenders, what you have is this impunity across board. And the big question is, and one of the legislators did mention to me a couple of weeks ago that we are the ones who perpetrate, and we referring to the political class now, that they are the ones who perpetrate these electoral offenses, but they are also the ones who are supposed to make the law. You think that, in all honesty, they will make laws that goes against themselves? That is not possible. So those are the issues.
What an ironical point here to drop the anchor. Samson Itodo is Executive Director of Yaga Africa. Thanks very much for coming to shed light on Nigeria's democratic movement, I would say.